You might have seen news reports telling Americans that they ought to continue eating meat, including the most unhealthful varieties like sausage and hot dogs and bacon. What's this about?
Previously on X-Men.
Absolutely, by definition, any evil whatsoever can be justified by this equation. Now, net happiness. Think about the meaning of the word net. It's like net profit. Okay? So net profit. You earn a certain amount of money, and it costs you a certain amount of money. You lose a certain amount of money. So you subtract the losses from the profits, and what do you get? You get the net income, net profit, what have you. Okay? In this same way, you're talking about some posited quantity of happiness or enjoyment or well-being, and then subtracting the misery, the harm, the torture, the suffering you inflict, whatever it may be. Any evil whatsoever can be justified this way, including killing cows in order to eat their flesh. There's no end to it. Okay?
Well, a private company called NutraRex published some articles in the Annals of Internal Medicine. And some of the articles were meta-analyses, which were nothing new, except that they combined the results of prior studies that confirmed that, indeed, if you reduce meat consumption, you reduce your risk of cancer and heart attacks and stroke and diabetes. But then they also published a study that said that if you ask omnivores what do they think about meat, they say they like it. For some, it's important to them. So the conclusion they arrived at, and I am not making this up, was that the benefit of reducing cancer risk and heart attack risk and stroke risk and diabetes just isn't worth it if it means reducing meat.
Any evil whatsoever can be justified this way, including killing cows in order to eat their flesh. There's no end to it. Okay.
Okay, so I think that we need to be really careful when we're talking about the difference between any evil could be justified and any evil is justified. Okay, I think that one thing that Eisel is criticizing, and one thing where, he and I are on absolutely the same page about, is that people often engage in utilitarian reasoning to justify really bad behavior. So the point is that for all these ethical theories, there are ways that we could misapply them to real life cases in order to make it seem like we're justifying really bad things. But once we actually look at the real world, it's just not going to be the case that eating cows is going to be justified by utility calculus.
What is it that makes a philosophical argument good or useful or worthwhile out here in the real world? Not on a chalkboard in a university classroom, not when you're trying to get an A+ on an academic exam. I'd say, off the top of my head, salience, sincerity, helpfulness. All right? Salience. When we philosophize, what we're saying has to really be salient to the person we're speaking to the situation we're speaking to, can't be irrelevant. And in this guy's case, that's one of my main complaints about him, is that he will just invent errors and ascribe them to me that have nothing to do with my argument, that have nothing to do with what I'm saying. He will stop me in mid-sentence and say, well, I don't know if he's saying this, but let's pretend that he is, so I can show off that I have book learning relevant to this other problem that's in no way salient to what he actually said or the point he's making or where he's going with this. Salience is a big one. It's a big factor here. Sincerity. Is it really possible that this guy is sincere when he says that he's just never heard of utilitarian arguments being made to justify killing cows to eat meat? He's just never heard of this. He claims to be a vegan and involved in animal rights. This is just a totally unthinkable notion to him, that there were people out there on the sidewalks doing interviews with vegan activists that are recorded and uploaded to YouTube. There are people talking about the ethics of meat eating, and they'll say to you straight to your face, well, it's true, eating meat is bad for the environment, and it causes all the suffering to animals, and it probably shortens your lifespan and increases your chances of getting a heart attack and cancer. But nevertheless, when they think in terms of the pleasure-pain calculus the brutal terms used by John Stuart Mill for this, when they think in terms of their own felicity, their own enjoyment, their own pleasure, their own utility, nevertheless, eating meat is, in their minds, justified. The harm being done just doesn't measure up to their enjoyment of it. And I hate to tell you this, but PCRM is in court right now. I just played you guys a few short snippets, Neil Bernard talking about that. PCRM is pressing a case that may ultimately end up in court, some kind of lawsuit, against a peer-reviewed journal. So step 1 is going to the editors, going to the universities, but probably steps 2 and 3. It may go past the university ombudsman and end up in a court of law. They are challenging an article that claimed in exactly this way that the health benefits of reducing meat, so this is not even a vegan diet, not even eliminating meat. They claim the health benefits of reducing the amount of meat you eat cannot justify the loss of pleasure, the loss of felicity, the loss of enjoyment. And they have social science research to prove it. Of course you can. If you go out and interview a whole bunch of cocaine addicts and say to them, hey, are you aware that cocaine is bad for your health? Yeah. Are you aware that it's bad for, your economic future, that you're likely to die in poverty? You're much more likely because you're using cocaine? They say, yeah. You can talk them all the way through it and say, okay, so now, on a scale of 1 to 10, the harm being done in your life by cocaine, and then how much pleasure you get out of it, and do you plan to continue using cocaine? And they'll tell you, they're crackheads. They're going to keep on being crackheads. Alcoholics are going to keep on being alcoholics. They're not doing this blind. You think in the 21st century, alcoholics believe whiskey is good for their health? You think anyone doesn't know that vodka causes brain damage? Really? You think they don't know that alcohol causes damage to an unborn fetus and so on? And women keep drinking alcohol during pregnancy in the 21st century. And they can sit down and give you an interview and think in purely utilitarian terms. Yet this is the real world. This isn't just something on a chalkboard in a university classroom. This is the horrifying, disturbing truth of being alive on planet Earth in 2019, is that people in their millions will justify any evil, cocaine, alcohol, red meat, the murder of cows, the decimation of the rainforest, ecological devastation, you name it, they will justify that in terms of their own pleasure. And this historical tradition, this philosophical tradition, this ethical and political tradition, John Stuart Mill was a member of Parliament. Bentham and Mill, these were political figures, not just philosophical figures. And hey, that's always been true of philosophy, going right back to Socrates. Socrates was a political figure and a religious figure, not just a philosophical figure. This is not just in the parlor rooms. This is not just in university classrooms. Okay? The political movement that is utilitarianism, the philosophical tendency and method of the pleasure-pain calculus. Yeah, this is part and parcel of what we're dealing with here in the real world when vegans have to stand up and say, hey, there are things that matter more than your enjoyment. Okay? In the same way that we have to challenge all kinds of other evils in human history that people are attached to, that evils that have become so familiar through their cultural upbringing that they're not perceived as evils at all. Choices that people don't even think they're making because they never even thought they had a choice. They didn't grow up choosing between a vegan diet and a meat-eating diet. They just grew up with food the way their grandmother made it for them. They just grew up being told, have another drink of whiskey, it will do you good, and not questioning, what does it mean for whiskey to do me good? It's doing you brain damage, but you perceive that brain damage as relaxing. And millions of people's lives are destroyed by it. All right? This is not hyperbole. Okay? So for you to come on camera, again, lack of salience, lack of sincerity, maybe it's just lack of intelligence.
But once we actually look at the real world, it's just not going to be the case that eating cows is going to be justified by utility calculus.
Did you think that sounded intelligent? Where did that come from? Where did it come from? Your self-confident assertion that nobody would ever justify killing cows to eat meat in terms of utilitarian calculus, in terms of pleasure versus the harm done. That is in court right now. PCRM is pressing the case right now, absurdly enough, against a peer-reviewed scientific paper making precisely that argument.
So the conclusion they arrived at, and I am not making this up, was that the benefit of reducing cancer risk and heart attack risk and stroke risk and diabetes just isn't worth it if it means reducing meat.
And millions of people around the world make the same argument informally in their kitchens, parents talking to their children where the children are vegan, and the parents are still eating meat, on the sidewalks, vegan activists talking to a stranger, all around the world. Sure, this is a major philosophical question people deal with in real life. And your response to it shows the extent to which your experience in academia, getting a master's degree, now getting a PhD, Aaron, the extent to which this has divorced you from the reality of what philosophy is all about and what it always has been about since Socrates. Okay? If you're going to do this thing, if you're going to be a public intellectual on YouTube, and I encourage you to do so, maybe when you've done 500 videos, when you've done 1,000 videos, you'll be better at this. Okay? You've got to keep it salient. You've got to keep it sincere, and you've got to keep it helpful. What is helpfulness about? It's at the core of philosophy, because philosophy ultimately is a problem-solving method, right? Philosophy is not about who has more citations, me or you, right? It's not about who can use more jargon, me or you. You recognize what the problem is, whether it's the problem the other person is suffering with directly, or a problem on a social scale, or maybe a problem on a more metaphysical, abstract level, but whatever. You recognize what the problem is, and then you present your arguments in a way that's helpful, okay? And it's a struggle for me, okay? I didn't make this video 3 days ago, because 3 days ago I was at the gym. I went to the gym 3 times in one day. I was all pumped up. I've been dealing with a back injury. I've had all kinds of problems. And I knew I was going to sound angry as hell if I got on camera and responded to these arguments, okay? It's not always that easy for me to sound helpful, okay? The problem of utilitarianism and its consequences in our life, in our political culture right now, that's a real problem to grapple with. And I would encourage you to come back on camera and talk about this in a more sincere, in a more salient, and ultimately in a more helpful way. Because it's not about who's right and who's wrong, you or me, right? It's about what kind of society do you want to have in the future, and what are you willing to do to get it in the next 5 years.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.